dancers, happy Wednesday. Welcome back to Conversations with the Pros. Today things are going to be a little bit different, so I want to explain why. I am so excited to have Aicha on the series, but when we were planning our conversation, one thing that Aicha expressed is that she gets a ton of messages from dancers about nutrition and about food. So we figured, why don't we shift this conversation a bit? I will definitely be chatting with Aicha about her experiences as a dancer, but we're also going to shift most of the conversation to questions for me about nutrition. So we've previously gathered a bunch of questions from dancers all over the world, and we are going to cover those questions. So Aicha, let's get you in here. So as I was saying, everyone, this is going to be a little bit different from my usual Conversations with the Pros. We're going to shift the conversation a bit, where Aicha is going to be asking me a bunch of nutrition related questions. Those So we figured it would be a great opportunity to just expand on the education portion of this. Hi.
Hi, Rachel.
So nice to finally get this together. I know we've had some timing issues and I had to cancel one, so I appreciate your flexibility.
Yes, of course. I'm so happy to be talking to you. I know it's been difficult because of the time difference and everything, but I'm so glad to be here talking to you.
Yeah, so I figured because this is a little bit different from my usual Conversations with the Pros, what I'll do is I'll introduce myself, and then I'd love for you to introduce yourself, and then maybe we can dive into some of those nutrition questions.
Yes, that sounds great.
All right. Well, hi everybody. So I'm Rachel. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. For those of you who don't usually follow me or know me, I specialize in all things dancer nutrition and health. My platform, The Healthy Dancer, is really designed to help you all learn how to fuel for performance. But the biggest caveat to this is just learning how to dismantle diet culture while we're doing it. And Aicha, I believe we found each other really on Instagram in regards to just you getting a ton of questions from dancers about food, about body image, about the role of food for dancers, and wanting to, clear up a lot of the confusion around these topics.
Exactly. I mean, as a professional dancer, I think a lot of us struggle with, the correct way for nutrition. And I've received a lot of questions, but I'm not a registered dietitian, and what works for me might not work for everyone. And so there's, I thought it would be best to ask you those questions and have people benefit from your wisdom and your insights, because I think what you're doing is so important and so great. And we all need more education around this topic. So it was, it's just really great to be here answering those questions with you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Dancers, unfortunately, just given the environment and given the pressures, especially aesthetic pressures that dancers face all over the world. That's what's crazy about this, right? Is the dance world, you're in Istanbul, I'm in New York. This is worldwide, and our struggles, the struggles that dancers experience, are worldwide. So having this ability to have these conversations between professionals like you, is, in my opinion, one of the best tools that we can share with fellow dancers, especially our youngest dancers and our dance students who are, have these budding careers ahead of them, so that we can hopefully tackle a lot of the misinformation and get some solid information back into our studios.
Absolutely. I mean, I've struggled with an eating disorder for many years, and I think I've been on both ends of the spectrum. I've been both fat shamed when I was growing up, but also skinny shamed when I was dancing professionally. So some people have, more severe or less severe eating disordered behaviors. But for me, I always thought I would be a better dancer if I lost weight and if I became super skinny, but it was actually the opposite. And I lost 2 of the best years of my life because of this. I was so unnourished and
Mm,
unhealthy that, one of my biggest strengths as a dancer is the fact that I can jump high and I can learn the choreography fast. And
mm,
when I was, really struggling with an eating disorder and not eating enough, it completely ruined my life. I mean, I wasn't able to jump as high. I always had brain fog, so I wasn't even able to pick up the choreography as fast as I usually could. And I know I don't want others to, go through the same. And just, talking about these and informing, educating us dancers about the subject is really important so other people don't have to experience what I've experienced, and maybe they won't lose some of their best years. And um, you know I'm I quit for 2 years, and I made a decision that I wasn't going to go back to dancing unless I was, healed, unless I was in a better place. Because yeah, and I think so many dancers quit because of this, and so many dancers cannot reach their potential because of food related issues, because of eating disorders and depression. So I think, once again, what you're doing is extremely valuable for all of us, and it literally impacts performance so directly that we should have been talking about these things for a
yeah,
long time ago, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know your story resonates with me so much. It resonates with so many dancers, but my struggles with food and with body image were a huge driver in my own burnout over 15 years ago. And same, it took me a great amount of time and healing and effort to get myself back into the studio where that love for dance was finally back to pushing me to continue to dance and work on my technique and just wanting to move forward as a dancer. You know what I mean? But when
Yeah.
you're struggling and not feeling enough, and the brain fog comes, the injury, on the brink of burnout, maybe you're not quite there yet, but you're on the brink of burnout. This is where dancers become so incredibly limited. And then, like you said, for most, end up quitting or leaving the dance
Yeah,
world. So yeah. So do you want to get started with some of these questions and we can like question
absolutely.
quick fire, go through them?
I'm actually curious myself about the answers.
Yeah.
So, the first question was, do you recommend protein powders for dancers?
This is a great question. So, generally speaking, dancers, I always say we want to prioritize a food first approach when possible, right? We easily can, as long as it's accessible, get in all of our nutritional needs from food. But there's a huge caveat to this because for many dancers, that's not always accessible, usually from a time perspective. So dancers who are navigating a very busy performance season, specifically like now with Nutcracker, or
Yeah.
dancers, right? Or like a competition season. So I'll have my dancers who are moving through YAGP, right? And they've got their finals week. And that could be a very dance intensive type of week. This is where we can see a major benefit of incorporating something like protein powder into their meal plan. So usually protein powder from a general perspective, it's not necessarily something that dancers have to obsess over on a daily basis, but it can absolutely be a helpful addition, especially for times of just more intense dancing. So think
Mhm.
performance seasons, competition seasons, and I would say for my younger dancers, summer intensive season. It can be
Mhm.
really helpful, especially in that like post-class period for recovery.
That's great. And I'm just curious, what do you think about protein bars? Is that
Yeah.
the same applies
It,
here, right?
Yeah. So when we're thinking of protein bars, bars in general is such a broad term. I am a
Mhm.
huge fan of bars for dancers, right? Even as a daily option versus like the protein powder. We could have granola bars, fruit and nut bars, fruit and nut and
God, I
seed
love
bars.
them.
Same. A lot of sometimes I have a bunch of recipes dancers can make their own. I mean, the legit for me, a bar, what I'm thinking of it as being a portable, convenient, and energy dense option for a dancer.
Mm-hmm.
So again, going back to a dancer's busy schedule, bars become super important and even dependable, right? Even when you're not in those crazy dance seasons. So yeah, I think bars can be fabulous additions. Now, with that being said, if we're now looking more specifically at protein bars, yes, similar to protein powders, they can be very helpful. The one thing that we want to just keep an eye out for when it comes to a lot of protein bars, specifically protein bars that on the label are going to read like 20 grams more of protein. I often find that these bars have some additional ingredients in them that might not necessarily help a dancer at the moment. So specifically sugar alternatives. So I'm forgetting the word, but specifically sugar alcohols. A lot of these bars will contain sugar alcohols, and there's nothing inherently wrong about this. It's just that a lot of sugar alcohols tend to cause a lot of stomach discomfort. So I'll have dancers who are very reliant on protein bars and then also experiencing a lot of stomach discomfort later in the day, not necessarily connecting the two. So that's what you want to be careful for when it comes to protein bars. Again, they can be helpful, but I would say just peek the ingredients, stay away from those that do have sugar alcohol specifically. Other sugars are fine. It's going to give us energy. It's going to give us fuel. But sugar alcohol specifically can leave us with a lot of stomach upset. And I find that protein bars specifically tend to be culprits of those.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
That's great. And what would be a nutritious breakfast example for someone who doesn't like eating in the morning, especially before class?
Yeah, this is a great question. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge, I hear this a lot, right? Dancers just not being hungry early in the morning before class. There could be several reasons for this. Sometimes dancers, if they're coming from a restrictive background, whether they've had a previous eating disorder or just previously had some disordered eating going on, and there's like a spectrum, there's a difference. What we can often see is an unreliance of hunger cues. I don't know if that's a word. Inability to rely on hunger cues fully. So if a dancer is experiencing a lack or just complete diminishing of hunger cues early on, sometimes I do encourage that we try to first reignite those hunger cues a bit, and that's where I definitely want you to try and get something in the morning. Does it have to be a full-blown 3-course meal? Absolutely not. We can definitely start low and slow. That's fine. But getting something in is important. So ideally, a balanced breakfast. We're always thinking about balance. No matter what vehicle this is, we want to check the boxes of our 3 macronutrients, making sure that we have foods or ingredients rich in carbohydrates, protein, and fat. So for dancers who really have no appetite, who are struggling to get in anything, this might be where we're starting with something easier like a bar and even like a protein shake. It might be easier for dancers to drink rather than eat. And when I say protein shake, I mean like still a balanced shake, maybe fruit for carbohydrates. We could potentially add a protein powder, or we can perhaps add some yogurt in there. We can even, I've seen and even tried adding a little bit of avocado into a shake, cacao powder. Got a bunch of recipes on my blog, but sometimes it is easier to drink earlier in the morning than actually eat, especially if you're on the go. So this could be a good start. Again, it's just a start. I do want dancers to explore the potential down the road of that shake or that smoothie becoming more of a sit-down meal, but it's not necessarily something that we have to start off with right off the bat. Another thing that I often suggest, so here in the States, this might sound silly, but here in the States, we are big with like the frozen waffle game. Do you guys have that there? Frozen waffles?
No, we don't.
So
but I've had them before. I love them.
we have them here. There are a bunch of really great brands too that put a bit more emphasis on nutrient density into their options. So some of my favorites are like Vans Waffles is one here that we have in the States. There's a couple other, Kodiak Cakes is another one that we have here in the States. They're like a whole grain frozen waffle. They take less than 5 minutes to heat up. This with nut butter or seed butter on it, 2 of them, again, can be taken on the go. Something super easy to just trial, right? So that we can start to explore the importance of getting something in. Because I can't stress this enough. Even if you don't have an appetite in the morning, I do want you to get something in. It doesn't necessarily have to be a large 3-course meal. Like I said, we can start small, but we want to get you started for the day, especially because as the day goes on for dancers, the diminished hunger cues often continue until like the evening hours. And this is where we start to see this pendulum of where dancers will not feel hungry at all, go throughout their day, and ultimately feeling famished later in the day. And then right, just drives this cycle, this pendulum of appetite dysregulation. And in my work with dancers, first thing off the bat, one of our biggest goals is actually working towards appetite regulation. And oftentimes that starts with figuring out how we can get some balanced meals and snacks into our day.
That's great. I mean, there's so much pressure and programming around body size, perfectionism,
Yeah.
especially in the dance world, which causes us to distance ourselves from our intuition, the natural mechanism that tells us when to eat, what to eat, how much to eat. And yeah, I think that's great because if diets worked, if restriction worked, they would have worked by now, right? I mean, I find it really interesting that diet industry is the only industry that continues to thrive, even though, despite the huge failure rate.
Yeah.
So we still believe them. We're so seduced by them, but they're not sustainable or effective, especially in the long run, like not eating all day. And then, of course, you're going to binge in the evening and you'll eat everything in one sit. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Yeah.
I,
So,
I often, I don't mean to cut you
mhm.
off, but I often say, our bodies are way smarter than diet culture, than the diet industry, right? Despite all of their false promises, at the end of the day, we still see that 98% of people who diet, they fail in those efforts,
Yeah.
that the weight is gained back, if not more, within a year. And the 2%, by the way, that it supposedly works for, the behaviors that these people are participating in are highly parallel to those of an eating disorder. So it's really fair to conclude that dieting does not work, and especially when it comes to dancers who have increased needs and such high physical demands, it's only going to lead them towards burnout and injury.
Absolutely. So, do you have any tips for hypermobile dancers? Is there anything hypermobile dancers should do differently in terms of nutrition?
This is a really good question. I do want to preface this by I actually have an entire guide for hypermobile dancers on my blog. So we'll touch on it.
Amazing.
Yeah, we'll touch on it briefly, but it is a question that I'm constantly asked. So there's two big things that I want to pull out from this. The first is we have to be really careful when it comes to experiences or even diagnoses for dancers, specifically around hypermobility, even other like autoimmune types of diagnoses as well, because oftentimes what I see is a lot of diet culture rhetoric around nutrition information for these experiences. So I'll often hear from hypermobile dancers or dancers who experience any type of autoimmune, maybe inflammatory type of issue. And oftentimes, immediately, dancers will go to the mindset of, I need to avoid certain foods for this condition, rather than I need to add certain foods for this condition.
Yeah.
So we see this a lot with like digestive disorders as well. It's we the first line of defense, unfortunately, is to point the finger at specific foods. Those most common foods are like, I need to avoid gluten, I need to avoid sugar, I need to avoid eggs, just as an example. Where what this ultimately does is drive us to a disordered relationship with food and further increase the stress response that we're experiencing around food, worsening potential symptoms of hypermobility or even symptoms of EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So first things first, I know it's a very general thing, but I encourage that dancers who experience hypermobility to first work on their relationship with food. We want to reduce as much stress as possible around food. In regards to specific nutrition interventions, it goes without saying for all dancers, especially hypermobile dancers, we do want to, when accessible, incorporate different nourishing options within each meal and snack. So focusing on protein is important, yes. Getting in complex carbohydrates from more fibrous type of ingredients, yes. But also fat, getting in foods that are rich in anti-inflammatory unsaturated fats, foods that are rich in omega-3s specifically, will be incredibly helpful for hypermobility as well. Just in regards to if there is any level of inflammation, which there could be, reducing that a bit.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And someone messaged saying, I'm afraid of eating carbs like bread, pasta, etc. Are carbs necessary?
Can you see me?
Yes. Yeah, I can see you.
Awesome. Can you repeat the question?
Of course. We received a question saying, I'm afraid of eating carbs like bread, pasta, etc. Are carbs necessary?
Yeah, this is such a great
Great question,
question.
right? So many people feel that way.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the two macronutrients that often get the most shade in the dance world and even in the sport world at large are carbs and fat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and protein is often put on a little bit of a pedestal. But the truth is, all three of these macronutrients are just so incredibly important for different reasons. Carbohydrates, specifically from a biological standpoint, are the most readily available energy source for a dancer. So when we're in our classes, just to get really specific for a sec, when we're in our dance classes, when we are physically dancing, at that moment, our body is tapping into what we call glycogen stores. Glycogen is basically energy that's stored in two places. Specifically, all of our muscles store glycogen. Our liver stores glycogen too, but a focus on our extremities and our muscles, because this is literally what we are using with every releve, every fondue, every jump, everything that we're doing in class. It's because of our musculature, right? So glycogen, we're relying on glycogen with every strike of the foot, with every movement. The interesting thing about glycogen, so first of all, what is glycogen? It's carbohydrates. It's the storage of carbohydrates on our muscles. And the interesting thing about glycogen, unlike with much of the other nutrients in our body, glycogen depletes very quickly. Our glycogen stores on our muscles really can deplete even after a 90-minute intense dance class. So not only is it important to get carbohydrates into our meal plans, it's very important to get carbohydrates multiple times throughout our day. And this is where, again, it goes back to eating consistently throughout the day, not just eating in the morning and then not eating again until the evening, or not eating anything until the evening. We really want to make sure that we are eating regular meals and snacks throughout the clock, essentially, because that's what's going to continue to replete the glycogen on our muscles, not only setting ourselves up for dancing on that same day, but even setting ourselves up for dancing tomorrow and the next day. So yes, goes without saying that carbs are critical.
Yeah. I mean, when I was dancing at Northern, our director would come up to us and say, when it was Nutcracker season, she would ask us, did you eat your carbs today?
Yeah, I love hearing that.
Yeah, I think they knew, they were aware of how important carbs were. So what would you recommend to a dancer who doesn't eat meat or fish? What is the best way to get protein for a vegetarian?
Yeah, also a great question. I know a lot of dancers follow plant-based lifestyles, and we can, define plant-based on a spectrum from being just, adding more plants to your plate, vegetarian, to even veganism. And I fully support all of these lifestyles. I just, as a disclaimer, always want dancers to turn to these lifestyles only when it's coming from a place of, let's just say, animal welfare, maybe environmental sustainability, maybe it's coming from a financial, cultural, or even religious place. We want to avoid turning to these lifestyles for reasons of wanting to change our bodies, or even reasons of just wanting to be healthy, because that's where these lifestyles can quickly turn from being a lifestyle into a restrictive diet.
Yeah.
Right. So when it comes to plant-based lifestyles like vegetarianism, there are such a plethora of foods that we can get protein from. In fact, most foods have protein. And unfortunately, because that macronutrient, unlike the others, is really put on a pedestal, we often think that we need more than we actually do need. And it is true, dancers do need some more protein in comparison to the general population, but still, we don't need to necessarily aim for every meal or snack to be this like high protein superstar. So I would encourage that in regards to some protein rich options, plant-based versions, legumes, beans, lentils are great, nuts and seeds, hemp seeds. I don't know if you have that by you. This is a big thing in the States these
Yeah,
days.
I love them. I have them every
Oh, they're
day.
fab. Yes, me too. Me too. They're fabulous. You can put them on salads. You can put them in smoothies. You can put them in cereal. Literally anything. It does help to boost the protein, the plant-based protein a bit. And the great thing about plant-based proteins is that they're actually usually also rich in fiber, complex carbohydrates. So you're getting a lot of bang for your buck with a lot of these foods, which is great.
Even fats with nuts,
Yes,
right?
absolutely. Even fats, exactly. Hummus, obviously hummus is chickpea based, but you're getting protein, you're getting fats, you're even getting complex carbs. So a lot of these additions really check all three of those boxes, making them not just great for plant-based dancers, but really great for any dancers.
That's great. And what is the best dessert replacement for dancers? Should we
This
just
is a
go eat cake or?
this is a great question. Okay, so I cannot stress this enough, but I really do encourage that if dancers are wanting dessert, they give themselves unconditional permission to eat dessert and to enjoy it. What does it mean to have unconditional permission? This is another topic I'm constantly talking about on my own feed, but also on my blog. Unconditional permission means that we are allowing ourselves to eat any type of food without strings attached. Oftentimes for dancers, these strings are, I've got to burn this off, I've got to save up calories for this. If I'm going to eat this, I need to eat the lighter alternative of it. So that replacement, that's kind of being assumed in this question. So when we grant ourselves this unconditional permission, by the way, it doesn't happen overnight. This is a lot of mindset shift work that I do with the dancers in the Healthy Dancer. But when we do reach a place where we can eat foods without strings attached to it, we become more at ease around these foods and more likely to tune into fullness satisfaction cues. When we are subconsciously telling ourselves that we shouldn't be eating something, or that if we do eat something, we have to do X, Y, Z in return, then we enter or are more likely to enter that mindset of, you know what, let me get all of this in now because starting tomorrow, I'm not going to do it again. I'm going to start over tomorrow. And it drives us back onto that pendulum that I mentioned earlier, where we feel super in control around that food to ultimately feeling super out of control around that food. And I can't stress this enough to dancers that our relationship with food, it doesn't have to be like this. We can actually find a way to eat dessert every single day and to actually eat it in a way that leaves us feeling physically good and not necessarily feeling physically unwell or physically over full. So the biggest suggestion I have is, instead of thinking, what can I replace my dessert with? Actually, how can we rebuild our relationship with that dessert? Oftentimes it starts with unconditional permission. So dancers, if you want to learn more about this, head over to my blog because I really walk you through the steps of how to do that. Start with unconditional permission with the real deal, and see how that allows you to better tune into mindful eating cues, where you can be left feeling, like I said, physically well and not necessarily having that fear of, I'm not going to be able to trust myself around this food.
Yeah, it all comes back to the relationship with food, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So the next question, what are some foods or drinks that can help me de-bloat, especially during my menstruation cycle?
Yes. Okay, great question. So the topic of bloat is a large topic because there's a lot that has to be picked picked apart a little bit in regards to feelings of bloat, because feelings of bloat, it's like the term overeating. For every dancer, it is defined differently, right? So what one dancer feels is overeating might actually be another dancer's amount of food that they actually need to nourish themselves. You see where there's like this really challenge. So when one dancer feels bloated, that feeling of bloat might actually just be a feeling of fullness that they're not necessarily used to because they've
Yeah.
restricted so long. Do you know what I mean? So
Absolutely, yeah.
so conversations around bloat are not so superficial, right? We really have to take into the context a dancer's body image, believe it or not, before we can say, okay, well, how do we reduce bloat? Well, I don't really know, because if you're coming from a restrictive background and now you're saying that you're feeling very bloated, I'm wondering if this is more of an adjustment that you have to experience in regards to feeling fullness. I see this time and time again with dancers. So that's like one part of the conversation. The other part, maybe more actionable tip for right now, for dancers, if you are feeling uncomfortable, we can take a look and explore options and see, are you having some more sodium in your diet than usual right now? That could be a cause for retaining water. I'll be honest with you, it's the rarer cause. And more often than not, it's really addressing those feelings of fullness first before actually addressing, like, okay, well, what can we avoid because of the bloat? Well, it's actually, I hate to say this, but again, the conversation of our relationship with food comes back in, because if a dancer is experiencing this recurring feeling like they're restricting themselves and then feeling like they're can't stop eating, or feeling like they're eating past fullness all the time, well, that comes back to the interventions of their relationship with food, and how can we lean more towards appetite regulation. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
it's a difficult question to answer quickly, honestly, because most often, if not always, what I'm seeing is that a dancer's experience of bloat, not that I don't want to discredit anyone's experience of what they're feeling, but we do need to have conversations and explore the possibility of what is fullness and what does fullness feel like when we are actually nourishing our bodies adequately.
Yeah, and could it be also the fact that, a lot of dancers don't eat anything in the morning? They just starve themselves, and then once they eat suddenly in the evening, maybe we just feel full
Yeah.
and deep bloated because we're not, our digestive system hasn't been working the entire
Yes.
day. Could that
Yes.
cause the feeling of bloat? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
is eating late unfavorable for body composition? Which is kind
So
of connected to the previous question.
yeah, it does all connect. If a dancer does not have the time earlier in their day to perhaps get that next snack in, or get that next, I like to call them eating opportunities to give our body
Mm,
more nutrients, then we're very much going to need to rely on some later hours to get those nutrients in. So no, the time of your meals and your snacks is not going to have this major impact on body composition. What's most important is that during your waking hours, we are getting in consistent meals and snacks so that your body has all of those tools and calories and energy that it needs to set you up for the next day and thereafter.
mm, great. And a lot of dancers do intermittent fasting leading up to performances to lose weight. What are your thoughts about fasting?
Another great question. So similar, we really want to steer clear of these fad diets, these trendy options that eventually lead us to restricting our food intake. And actually, so many reasons for this, some of which we actually covered in this live. The first one that immediately comes to mind to me is glycogen. If we are intermittently fasting, then we are risking that inability to replenish glycogen on our muscles, which is immediately going to, like you experienced years ago, which was your jumps, right? One of your biggest
Mhm.
qualities likely diminished without the adequate stores of carbohydrates on your muscles, which, like I said, depletes very quickly. So
Mhm.
intermittent fasting often gets in the way for us to constantly replenish those stores. The other major reason here, it does go back to our relationship with food. Once we start to attempt to abide by these stringent rules around what we eat or what time we eat, we are bound to again enter that cycle of food guilt is a big one, food anxiety, mealtime anxiety, obsessive thoughts around food, which are really taking away from our capabilities in the studio. So those are the two clear examples of why I do not recommend intermittent fasting. Technically, we are all intermittently fasting when we're sleeping at night, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
that that's very technically a nocturnal intermittent fast is ideally happening if dancers are getting an appropriate amount of sleep at night. So that's something that we can think about as well. But really going into this and thinking like I need to try to abide by these stringent rules in the times I'm eating, it's actually not going to help a dancer in the long term. It could even really hinder their ability to jump high, to move fast, to pick up choreo, and so forth.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah, you're welcome. This was so fabulous. I'm so happy that we've been
Yeah.
able to connect and educate all of our audiences about these important
Yeah.
topics.
Yeah, and everyone definitely check out Rachel's work. It's really inspiring and it's exactly what dancers need. So I can't wait to read all of your posts myself,
Yay.
especially about hypermobile dancers. I'm really
Yeah.
curious to dive into that. Thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure to talk to you and chat with you.
Yes, of course. I'm a fellow hypermobile dancer, by the way, so it's a topic
Mm,
that really hits closely for me as
yeah.
well, especially because there's a lot of misinformation around hypermobility, food, and the role of nutrition for dancers. So I really just in the last couple months tried to uncover a lot of the misinformation there. So definitely go check it out, and we'll be in touch, Aisha.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was so nice
Thank you
speaking to you. We'll
so much.
talk soon.
You too. Talk soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Bye.
Bye. See you.